My upgrades are invincible. Rewrite, Chapter 4, Fantasy Fiction by Azazyel. Tsubaki was a slave driver, no doubt about that. As for the next half an hour, she had me fuse all kinds of metals and materials into one another so she could literally skip the fusion process during her own forging, in which she merged monster drops with the various mystical metals. So, for saving you dozens of work hours, can I get some drops you don't need to make my own weapons and armor better? I asked tiredly, and Tsubaki blinked in surprise at my words. Yeah, sure. She drawled out, and then she bent over to drag a box out of a low shelf, showing how her voluminous pants could be tight and how her backside didn't lose out much to my goddess Hephaestus's sculpted ass. Anyway, my eyes snapped upwards to her face as she stood up with the box, and I coughed as she dropped the box onto the table, making me cough as a plume of dust got shot out of the box, with Tsubaki chuckling. Yeah, you can have these, she said with a nostalgic light in her eyes before she continued. These are lower-end drops that I was supposed to use for various orders. But the adventurers died before picking them up, and their familia never came to claim the drops back after more than 5 years, so you can have them, she said, and I realized she was just giving me the crap that she wouldn't need to mark in the familia registry of materials. Was I going to complain the materials weren't fresh? Hell no, I wasn't, as I doubted it made any difference so long as the material magical essence was still within the drops, and if Tsubaki was willing to keep it, then I had no doubt that the drops had no issues. Alright, that will do. Lovely, I said, deadpanning as I opened the large box about the size of a good-sized shipping box, and I saw how fucking everything was a mess with no sense of organization. You just don't want to sort this, don't you? I said dully, and Tsubaki just giggled at my fed-up expression. Wordlessly I picked up a handful of war shadow claws with one hand, and in the other I reached into the box and grabbed a frog shooter tongue before shaking my head with a wry smile as I saw how all the materials were stuffed from below like the 10th floor, and I realized these materials were obviously from back when Tsubaki was a fresh new smith. Alright, thanks, Tsubaki. I am going to try to upgrade some of my gear and make some armor so I don't get my throat torn out in the dungeon, I said with gratitude clear in my voice. Tsubaki just clapped me on my back with a light chuckle before she spoke. Just be careful, newbie. The dungeon is alive in its own way and only wants to kill you. So don't try to stick your dick into one of the monsters unless you plan to tame it, Tsubaki said cheerfully, and seeing me gawk at her words she burst into laughter. Ha ha ha, you should see your face, SNRK. Yeah, there are a lot of female monsters in the dungeon, and yes, some dumbass like to tame them to get some easy puss, even out of the dungeon, she said shamelessly, but then she spoke more seriously. But monsters regardless of the species are dangerous, so don't do that stupid shit even if you come across a big titty goblin or something, Tsubaki said with an eye twitching, and I nervously chuckled as I could see there was a whole story about said big titty goblin she mentioned. So after that dire warning to not fuck dungeon monsters unless I was willing to risk terrible injuries, I quickly got away from Tsubaki before she could go on a tangent about the perverts in the dungeon with the box of old drops she gave me in space pockets. So once I got to my small private room, I was able to lay everything on the bed and figure out what I wanted to do. I hummed and thought as I took in the drops, and the first thing I did was take some of the high-quality steel and some of the infant dragon leather to make some armor for myself, with the steel being used to make a chain mail between the 2 layers of the dragon leather so I could still have good durability while also having the durability and fire resistance of the dragon's leather on the outside, and that's what I did for a simple Roman-style helmet, chest piece, and an armored skirt that hung down to my thighs, while I made more complicated armor to cover my knees and feet and greaves so I could maintain easy mobility. After putting on the armor that was just shy of being snug to my frame, I hummed and thought as I hopped in place, and I realized that just getting the fauna had boosted my natural strength by a good bit, so I couldn't really guess the weight of the armor exactly. But I knew that its lighter weight wouldn't be too bad even after wearing it for several hours in the dungeon. Now what the hell do I do for a weapon? I muttered as I checked on that spear, and I recalled the hidden mission within it, and I wondered if there were hidden missions for making other weapons and using monster materials in said weapons, and whether I could fuse the weapons with hidden missions done to other weapons to stack their effects. Do I stick with a spear or do I get fancy and go for some fantasy shit? I muttered as I stared at the spear I already made that had those goblin missions. But then I had a realization as I stared at the spear, and I recalled how my fusion could take the shape of whatever I damn well pleased if there was enough materials. I could make my weapons into the shape of Dark Souls and Elden Ring weapons, and seeing as I could fuse magical materials into them, perhaps I could even truly bring those weapons to life again. Wordlessly I took a pile of blood-sucking vines from the jungle floors, a handful of the serrated finger claws of war shadows, and lastly a small pile of monster stones, and then I fused a combination within my pocket space, and as I held the katana in my hand I could already hear the salty cries of countless PvPers and PvE players bitching about the rivers of blood katana from Elden Ring as the weapon's info filled my mind. Rivers of blood, drink daily the blood of your enemies. The blade uses the user's mana to send slashes of crystalline blood beams outwards with the movements of the blade. User will also be healed slightly by burying the sword into an alive foe and allowing the sword to drink the blood of the living. Hidden mission, dash. I couldn't help but manically giggle at the sight of the weapon as I dropped the sword onto my bed with a soft thudding noise. I leaned back to stare at the ceiling before sighing as I realized that using a katana is the most fucking weeb overused thing ever for someone being ice-skate. Should I try to make Thor's hammer and make it a combination of my glove so it will return to that hand via some magic magnetic fuckery? I pondered as I looked over my materials before I snapped my finger as I changed my mind and went a step beyond Mjolnir as I realized I could just make Stormbreaker, as I honestly didn't have the super great magical materials I would need to make the better Dark Souls and Elden Ring weapons like the Sword of Night and Flame, or other boss quality weapons. The problem with having the ability to make damn near any weapon I wanted with their special effects was that I literally didn't know what the hell to use. Of course, other than not wanting to use a super complicated weapon, as I wasn't going to spend weeks if not months learning how to use a bladed whip or something. Fuck it, I will do this then, I said, shrugging as I realized that my desire to make all these weapons meant that I was going to probably cycle through different weapons and not solely use one, as different situations in the dungeon could call for weapons with different abilities. So with that realization out of the way, I fused a wrist brace with a bunch of materials to make a good-sized battle axe that with a flex of mana would fly handle first back into my hand as I made the axe in the shape of the Leviathan axe from God of War, but without the whole freezing effect, as I had no such materials to grant the axe set abilities. Returning axe, axe that the user made to return to handle first to the user after being thrown. Hidden mission, X. Looking at the axe I made, I blinked as I realized that the X in the hidden mission area meant that there were no hidden missions for this weapon at all. So that means that weapons needed to be of a certain magical level or something to have them, maybe? Either way, I shook my head and sighed as I put my leftover materials away and tucked myself into bed, and relaxed. Because I was going back into the dungeon tomorrow after exploring Ororio a bit.